Okay.
Did you hit record?
I did.
Okay.
Right? It's recording.
It's recording right
It's
there.
recording.
See the light blinking? We haven't done this in a really long time, so I think the light blinking means we're recording.
I think you're wrong.
I guess we'll find out when we speak for like hours. And then, what are you doing?
I broke everything. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. I got a haircut.
Hi, everyone.
That's the point of this video. I just wanted to show off my new hair.
You haven't seen us in a really long time.
Yeah.
And we feel like we owe you an explanation.
There's a good reason why. I'll give you the short answer first. I won't make you sit all the way through this to find out what's going on. So you've noticed that there's been Hillary, there's been Alex, there's been Michael all over this channel, and with good reason. We haven't been on since January,
Yeah.
and that's because, almost a full year. Wow. But that's because back in in June, right? June. It's been June, yeah.
No,
but,
July.
July.
You got diagnosed in July.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with lymphoma, and over the last however many months it's been, I've been recovering, rehabbing, going through treatments, everything you can imagine and more. And short answer, today I'm well, not today, but I'm fine.
Well,
almost fine.
We have a PET scan in February.
Yes, but for the most part,
we think he's fine.
Yeah.
And we're not laughing to make light. It's just, it's been really long and it's been really hard. And the only thing we can do at this point, I think, is laugh.
That's what I've been trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the short answer. And I guess this video is going to be the long answer of everything that's happened. I don't really know who this video is for exactly.
I'm getting comfy.
Yeah, you get comfy.
You should get comfy too.
Yeah, it's going to be a while. You good?
Yeah.
Okay, we're comfy. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure who exactly this video is for. I felt like I'd like to do it. Just because, family and friends been wondering, like, what's been going on. And it's, like, hard to get into everything and go over everything because a lot has happened. So...
it's hard to relive everything, too. So please bear with us.
Yeah. And, there'll be a lot of different emotions in this video, I'm sure. And
also, for family watching and friends, you may not want to hear some of this stuff. So know your limits.
Yeah.
You've been warned. Some of it's,
Yeah, it's hard. So, I mean, this could be for, like you said, family and friends. It could be for anybody who happens to be watching this, going through something similar. Or it could just be for you and me, and that's fine too. Honestly.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so that's what's been going on for the last 6 months now. And I guess now we're gonna get into everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, in the beginning...
I'm just like...
You trying to hide?
No.
So, in the beginning, I'm gonna rely on you a lot.
Yep.
Because I was very, very, very out of it.
Yep.
And trying to remember all this stuff is very hard to do. And you're kind of my my memory bank, anyway, because I've got a bad memory as it is.
He really does.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
It's very bad. And you have a very good memory. So,
yes, I do.
By all means, at any point, feel free to jump in and be like, no, actually.
I'm sorry.
As you pick hairs off my body.
Sorry, everyone. I couldn't let you go the whole video with that.
Because it really just would have bothered everybody.
It would have bothered me.
Okay. So yeah, just feel free to jump in and tell me I'm wrong. That's not what happened.
Don't worry, I will.
I know you will. So this starts March of 2020.
So I just want to say,
yeah,
we actually started filming at-home videos for you guys for the shutdown, and we just like never got to finish them. And part of the reason is because of what happened with Dan, but another part of it is because, as you guys probably can relate, it was really hard. Like, the shutdown itself was really hard, and it took a toll. And I've been working from home, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. But we did intend to have content like the whole year for everyone, and things just didn't work out that way. So.
Yeah, and luckily, like we said, Hillary, Alex, and Michael, they've jumped in.
Yeah.
And they've filmed a lot of great stuff, and thank you guys for that, because that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for
keeping the channel going.
Teamwork and all that good stuff.
We're a family of 5.
Yeah. I think there's a pin video that we did half of and left off with, we'll be back tomorrow with more.
And we actually posted a teaser on our Instagram page about it, and it just never occurred. So we apologize for not following through, but understand that it wasn't intentional, and we really have been doing our best all year.
Eventually it'll happen.
Yeah. I'll whip all my pins out again, and...
You only had a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this starts really in March of this year. Even though I said 6 months, it starts in March because, it's in the height of coronavirus lockdown, and you're working from home, which is great, and it's actually very, very crucial to all this. And I was at work on a Friday, thinking I'd be back on a Monday.
He was working into the shutdown. To be clear, this was like
working from home.
I had been working from home for like 1 or 2 weeks at this point, and he was still going into work, and that in and of itself was hard, because knowing that he was going out and being exposed every day, it was like, you know,
my job was still trying to figure out how to handle working from home,
which ended up not happening.
Because I go home on Friday and find out over the weekend that I've been furloughed. So, and then that lasts for about a month, and then I think because it was or a little over a month.
You found out in May.
I found out in May.
That June 1st it turns into a layoff.
Yeah. Because
what we think is that where he worked, they just couldn't afford to keep people, like their health benefits going, without having them in the office. And his whole department got laid off.
Yeah.
It wasn't like just him, it was his whole department, and it was really hard because he's been there for years, and you can tell, and I'm sure a lot of you have felt this too, that when they give you that phone call, nobody wants to be laying people off.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So it was just as hard for the people doing the layoffs as it was for the people being laid off, and it was just...
Yeah.
It just sucks. It was unfair. But...
So, furlough...
I'm already crying.
Well, there's tissues here if you want them, so there's going to be tissues. So, furlough turns into being laid off. And then around the time of being laid off is when things physically start happening with me. The first that starts happening is I've started to get really, really bad back pains. Like really, really bad, to the point where no sleep at all. And I don't mean like, oh, I was up all night and then I was asleep, I'm groggy the next morning. I mean literally wide awake, no sleep the whole night through. Maybe, if I'm lucky, I got like an hour of sleep. And I think that hour or so of sleep that I got purely came out of just my body being exhausted and like passing out, and then waking up in an hour and getting, a whole day's worth of no sleep to follow that up. The back pain was really, really bad. The way that I could only describe it, it felt like somebody constantly was taking their knee and like pressing it into like my back, all over my back, the upper part of my back, lower back, spine, wherever. It was a different place every day. Somebody taking their knee and just like digging it into my back.
It was like watching him go through this pain was, at first it was kind of like weird, because we thought, when we, just for reference, we live with my parents, you know, and like when we got married, we moved out, and then we moved back in to save money on rent because we wanted to buy a house, and we've been here, and we have like a, you know, a setup where we have, you know, our own space and everything like that. But my family, oh, I'm sorry, the lighting is gonna be kind of off. The windows are like, you know, whatever. Yeah, but we live in a different kind of I want to say like setup than lots of people do. But in reality, it turned out to be really lucky for us, and we'll get to that. But you know, so watching him, like at first, you know, we went grocery shopping, and he always, you know, helps bring in the groceries, and he carries like the big thing of water, like the Poland Spring Dasani packs of water. So we had done that like a couple days before his back started hurting, and we thought maybe like, oh, you know, like he pulled a muscle or something. But then like the pain kept moving, which was kind of weird, and we were like, why is that? And then we thought, oh, well, maybe it's just because, you know, like we've been home. Like
I've
been
been
sitting
laid
on
off.
the couch.
I've been laying around, you know.
We thought like maybe sitting on the couch all day.
In the beginning, I was like,
doing
oh, I'm gonna take a couple weeks off, you
Yeah.
know, and kind of get my head back right, and
Yeah.
you know, use this for a happy
Yeah, like
occasion first.
like a break, right?
Yeah.
You know, so like, cause what's there to worry about right now? There's nothing really like to do. Like you can't go get a job anyway because like everything's shut down, right? So,
And back then, you were thinking, oh, this will only last like a couple weeks or a month or two.
we thought like,
So
we
I'll
thought
use
by
this.
like July and August and September we'd be back to normal.
Oops.
Yeah, that's funny. But like, yeah, so it was like that, and then, you know, so, but the pain kept moving, so then we were trying stretches, and then we were trying yoga, and like, I really love yoga, but like, he never really expressed an interest, and I'm like, we're doing yoga. He made him
heal you with yoga.
Made him do yoga, and that was pretty early on, and then he goes to me, I think it made it worse. I'm like, it didn't make it worse. He's like, I think it made it worse. So it was just like, nothing was working. We tried icy hots, which don't get hot, by the way.
No.
Icy hot people. It only gets icy.
Yeah. What's that about?
I'll
get to ask Shaq about that.
I'm a little upset. We're really disappointed. We tried Tylenol.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed away from Advil because at the time we heard, you know, you can't take Advil because, you know, you think you have Rona, and it's like we tried so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing even took the edge off for him.
No.
And I think that's kind of when it got to a point where we were like, something's really wrong.
Yeah.
Because,
well, and then it gets worse where it's not just back pains that are going on. I'm not getting any sleep at night, and I'm also sweating profusely at night.
he woke up one night. I'm sorry, I know.
No,
I'm cutting
go,
you off,
yeah,
but
yeah.
there was one night where, because his back pain kept me up too, because he was tossing and turning, and so I was in bed like listening to him be in pain all night, and so I was like getting really frustrated because I'm still working, and so like I need to show up for my job every day 3 feet away from my bed, but like, you know, but like it was hard, and I was scared about losing my job because at that time we didn't know what was going on. You know, I'm like, yeah, I'm working from home, but like how long is this gonna last? And I had just started this job in January.
Yeah.
It's a new company, like you know, there were so many things that were just scary, and so I was really stressed out over the fact that I also was losing sleep, and he would toss and turn in pain. And one night he just sat up and just sat like straight up in bed, and I woke up. I was like, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, I don't know. And he was dripping with sweat, like soaked through the bed.
Yeah. So what ended up happening is because Victoria's still working, I'm not working, so I thought, all right, she needs to get her sleep so she can go to work, so she can, you know, be the one working. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna sleep on the couch, basically. That way she gets her as much of a peaceful sleep as you can get. I'm out of her hair.
This couch, by the way.
This very one that we're sitting on right now. This was my bed for a while. And I was just sweating all night long, to the point where I went through shirt after shirt after shirt, changing them constantly because it would just be drenched in sweat. I would say anywhere from like 10 to 15 shirts over the course of one night.
We were doing laundry twice a day.
Yeah, I would be looking forward to the morning for somebody to just grab all my shirts, throw them in the washing machine, and give me a new batch of shirts to go through again.
It was, I mean, and keeping in mind that he's not sleeping, so he's awake pretty much 24 hours a day, suffering in pain, sweating to death. At this point, his appetite is kind of gone.
Yeah.
Which wasn't really a red flag at first, because I guess I just felt like since you were in so much pain, it made sense that you weren't hungry. But then there got a point where, like, I hugged him and I felt that he lost a significant amount of weight. And by the way, it's only been like 2 weeks. And so I was like, I'm like hugging him, and I remember thinking, like, I can wrap my arms around you better than I used to be able to, and that was scary. And so, and I don't remember if I said anything to you. I think I did, and then he weighed himself, and he's like, I've lost 20 pounds. And I was like, wow. And like at first we were like, wow, that's great, because you're not even trying. Like, it must be because you're not that hungry. And like, you know, it just like didn't click. Like nothing clicked. Like we knew something was wrong, but not, like, we didn't think what it was. You know, like we thought, I don't know what we thought.
I mean, it was almost like at that point where it was just 20 pounds, it was like, well, I need to lose weight anyway, so hey, I'm losing weight.
it was just
yeah,
you just don't make the connections. And so then he started migrating from room to room.
Yeah.
And like he was up here, you know, this is upstairs, this is our living room upstairs, and like he was sleeping on this couch, then he would go to the bed, then he would go downstairs into the couch in, you know, the common living space, and
carrying a fan with me.
The fan, like just carrying all his shit with him. And I'm like, please let me help you up and down the stairs. No. And I'm like, okay, crazy, you're gonna fall and hurt yourself or whatever. And that did happen. But so like he's migrating, and then it got to a point where he's like, so he's watching TV all night, he's up all night. I would come into this room this is where I work, and this is where our couch is, and he'd just be sobbing.
Yeah.
And he would just look at me, and he'd be just like,
yeah, because
having a mental breakdown. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like trying to comfort him, but I'm also trying to work, and I'm like, I don't know what to do.
The mental breakdowns is, I think you would agree, completely unlike me.
Yes.
I think I'm pretty level-headed.
Yes.
I got a pretty good grip on that.
Yes.
And when you're driven to that kind of insomnia, I guess you would say, where you're up all night, you're getting no sleep, it like really really wears down on you mentally. And like Victoria said, she would come into the room, and I would literally like be almost like grabbing my head, being like, I can't do this, like I'm getting no sleep, you know, like I'm sweating to death, and I really felt like lost on what was going on. I had no grip on what was wrong with me, but I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And to also add into what's going on, I'm taking numerous amount of showers. All day long. Every 15 minutes, I would say, every 20 minutes, I'm taking another shower. For two reasons. One, because I'm sweating so much and I want to feel like clean from all the sweat, so I'll take another shower. And the hot water from the shower on my back, for a brief moment, made me feel a little better. But the back pain was so constant that I'm taking so many showers. I think I counted it out one day. In a 24-hour span, I took 40-ish showers the whole day. Just over and over again into the shower for 10 minutes just to cool down my back. Come back upstairs, 10, 15 minutes later, I need to take another shower.
While this was happening, I started monitoring his temperature. I don't remember why I started monitoring his temperature. I guess because I was at first because we knew so little about COVID that it struck me at some point, this isn't going away. Maybe you have some weird variation of COVID. Like, I don't know. So I started monitoring his temperature, and I have a book. I don't bring it up, but like I have a book full of temperatures, days, times, blood pressure, heart rate, what he ate that day, all kinds of things, and his temperature would fluctuate so in the morning I would take it and it was 95.6, which
that's not good.
that's low.
Yeah.
And then like 2 hours later it would be 100.4, and then 3 hours later it would be 98.3, and then a couple hours later it would be 99.6. Like, it just fluctuated so severely. And so because of that, and because of the unknown, we were calling his primary care provider, and his doctor, he's been going to this doctor for years, and we couldn't get into the office because they were afraid he had COVID. So we had a virtual appointment, and he's telling his doctor what's going on, and his doctor goes, okay, maybe you pulled a muscle, this and that. I'm going to prescribe you some painkillers. Take it for a couple weeks, see how it goes. If not, call back. Those things did nothing. And just for reference, I mean, we can say it, right? What you took? He took Percocet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this man has never taken anything stronger than like an Advil before.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ever taken an Aleve up until this point, which also wasn't working. Yeah. Like, nothing was working. Percocet wasn't working.
And I was in so much pain and so desperate just for one night of sleep. I'll take 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I don't care at this point.
And I had him on a rotating Advil, Tylenol, mixed in with the Percocet. Then we switched it up to like Tylenol, Percocet, or Advil, Percocet, or whatever, like the combination that you can do is. And nothing. He was consistently on something.
I was on a 6-hour schedule for the pain.
And to his credit, he took them by himself. I didn't really monitor him. To his credit, he really didn't take them earlier than he was supposed to, because I was very strict on the 6 hours.
And I was really desperate too, because I think the schedule I was on was 8 p.m. 2 a.m.
Something like that.
8 a.m. 2 p.m.
Yeah.
So every 6 hours. So when you get to the 2 a.m. part, everybody's asleep except me, obviously, because I'm wandering around the house because I can't sleep. Yeah, see when
wandering like a ghost.
Yeah, basically. Oh, what's going on in this room? Nothing. Okay, the cat's running around. So at 1 a.m., I'm like, okay, only one more hour. At 1:30, I'm like, okay, only 30 more minutes. And like, I really wish I could have taken it earlier, but that's the one thing that I still had grasp on, is that like you can't deviate from when you're supposed to be taking these. You can't take more than you're supposed to be taking, because it's really going to mess you up in one way or the other.
Yeah, so, and like then we have my mom, who's like, like, she's great, but like she was like, let him take 4, he's a big guy. And I'm like, no. Like, I can't let him do that,
Yeah.
Like
so like I was saying, I'm so desperate for one night of sleep that I'll take anything at this point. Anything that he prescribed to me, it was like a godsend. Like, yes, yeah. I'm gonna go to the store, I'm gonna pick up this pain med, and I'm gonna get some sleep. And every single time
it didn't work that way.
Maybe
there was no relief.
I went from like 100% pain to like 95% pain.
Yeah, and it was and like that was like exciting.
Yeah, I was like, I'm on my way.
And
I'm gonna get some sleep.
Yeah, and it was just so it wasn't getting better.
So after about 2 virtual appointments with my doctor.
And we sent him for a COVID test, by the way. We have a clinic local that was doing them. They weren't rapid tests at that point, but I said, you know what, you need to get a test, because you need to get into your doctor, and maybe if you have a negative test, they will let you in, because something is very wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I remember he drove to the walk-in clinic, and I went with him, and I remember like where it is, we were in the parking lot. I couldn't go in with him, and he went in alone, but I could see in the building like him walking from like room to room, and I just, it took us longer than, I think it was supposed to be 3 days. You're supposed to get the results. It took longer than 3 days. I mean, that was happening for everybody who was getting tests at that time. We knew that it was going to take longer than 3 days, but then when it came back negative, I think I was kind of, in a way, hoping that it would be COVID, just because...
To get an answer.
Because I just was hoping that something was going, like, okay, we know what it is, and okay, this is what we can do, and okay, now he's going to get the care that he needs. Like, I was hoping for something, and like...
And we were looking online, trying to WebMD it to see what it is that I had, and the most likely one that it seemed was like some kind of spinal infection.
A spinal infection, because
the symptoms were very much in line to what I had going on.
There was a reason why we thought he had a spinal infection, a valid one, and so it just made the most sense. So we were like, okay, and I'm looking up, like, how long until you die before this spinal infection gets bad. Like, that's why it was so urgent. I was like, he needs to go to the doctor because he needs, like, all this medication. And we were thinking 6-week round of medication would be like what was needed for this spinal infection, and he'd be fine by whatever date. And, like, you know, we didn't think it was in my head there was no reason to think it was anything other than that. There was no, because all the symptoms matched so well.
Yeah.
It wasn't that.
Spoiler, it was not that. So we were able to finally get an in-person visit with
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were finally able to. His doctor just, like, insisted.
Yeah.
Because once we got the negative test, there's a big gust of wind coming. Sorry.
Hey, knock it off out there.
Once we got the negative COVID test and we called his doctor again, and his doctor was like, all right, you need to come in. Like, you need to come in. Something's really wrong. They're going to take your temperature at the door, but I don't care. You're coming in. And they ended up not taking his temperature at the door because our appointment was at like 8 o'clock in the morning, I think, before the person got there.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of walked in and we were like, is this like a lab? You know, like...
Sneaking me in.
Yeah, and like, but like, thankfully his doctor realized like something is severely wrong and we need to get you in because I need to look at you.
Yeah.
So that happened, and I just took note after note after note after note, and then he sent you for an MRI.
Yeah, so I get sent for a couple MRIs, and a couple CT scans.
No, the MRIs were first.
The MRIs were first.
Yeah.
Okay. So I went for a couple MRIs. Why did you take over here? Because you remember better than me for this part.
The MRIs were like a full body with and without contrast. And I don't know if anyone's ever had one. I'm sure some of you have.
I have.
They suck. But, like, he literally was on that table for like 4 hours.
With back pain.
And I know that because I was in the car waiting for 4 hours and I couldn't go in because of COVID. So I couldn't be in the building at all. So I was just sitting there like,
yeah.
Like, when are you walking out? You know, like,
yeah,
when are you coming out?
I went through, like you said, 4 hours of MRIs, and I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it. For whatever reason, my back decided to cooperate with me that day, and I was able to get through it.
Yep.
And then the blood work.
He had blood work too.
Yeah.
And they took so much blood, and they had so much trouble getting blood.
I've got tricky veins.
That was another thing. So we went, there was a lab upstairs from his doctor, and so he went up and I went with him, and I was allowed in there with him because I don't know why, but I was allowed. And he's in the little room, and they're taking like blood cultures like from each arm. And the nurse is like, and normally I'm squeamish like with blood and needles, but like I'm watching, I'm like, oh, that's cool, you know? And they're like, she's got like the needle on this arm, and she's like looking at me, and he's like sweating profusely, like dying with a mask on and everything, and she's like, there's no blood coming out, and like I'm watching like blood like go bloop bloop like into this like this big jar, and I'm like, okay, and she's like wiggling the needle, and she's like, I can't get any blood, and I'm like, well, you have to like, you know. But it was just like he was so like ill that like just like all of it
just
was
trying to draw blood.
It was just a mess. And he like I mean, it was just terrible.
Yeah.
And then, but then we didn't get the blood work back right away. It took like maybe a week or so.
Yeah.
And his doctor tested for everything.
Yeah.
Lyme disease, lupus, like everything.
And to be fair, my doctor from the beginning laid it out as a possibility, but a very, very unlikely possibility.
He said, he called us with the MRI results like the next day. And he said, you need to come in tomorrow morning. The radiologist thinks you have cancer. And he's like, I don't think you have cancer.
Because you're 29.
Well, actually, you were 28.
Well, I was 28. You're in good shape. There's just really no reason for you to. Like, he didn't really buy it either. And I didn't buy it in the beginning either. But the more that we kept going, the more tests I kept taking, the more we kept getting into this, I think I started to realize myself. Probably what I have.
We went in for the MRI, like for the, to see the doctor the next day. And he was like, look, the radiologist, I spoke to him, we reviewed the results together. He thinks you have metastasized cancer. And so we're like, excuse me, and he's like, I don't think you do. He's like, I think that you have sarcoidosis, which I have a lot of patients who have that, and they have very similar, symptoms. And he's like, and he's like feeling Dan, and he's like, oh, like you have a swollen lymph node here, like, because apparently sarcoidosis is an autoimmune disease, and it is similar to lymphoma in that it makes your lymph nodes swell, and there's a lot of similarities. So he's thinking it's that, because that makes more sense. He has autoimmune things run in his family, so that makes more sense. So then he orders an emergency CT scan that day, and the building is like right next door.
Yeah.
But so he's like, if you have swollen lymph nodes for sarcoidosis, it would be like here, like the chest ones. So we're like, okay, well, like hopefully it's that. So I remember like I drove him like next door, and they gave him this like shake, to drink, and we go home, and then we go back, and like he, drinks another shake, and then he gets the CT scan. And I called my boss that morning, getting out of the car, and I was just like, I can't work today. And my boss like heard in my head, like in my voice, he was like something's really wrong. And I'm like, they think, Dan has cancer. He's like, do whatever you need to do for your husband. He was like, I don't give a shit. He's like, the work will get done, don't worry about it. And I just like to hear those things, like when you need to hear those things, is a really important thing. I mean,
yeah. So blood work, scans, they all come back, and it's lymphoma.
But we need an oncologist, hematologist to do a bone marrow biopsy.
Yes. So
we've already decided at this point, without question from anyone, like I was on board, he didn't give a at that point. He was like, I don't know, he was totally out of it.
I just want to sleep.
My family, his family were adamant that he's going to Sloan Kettering.
Memorial Sloan Kettering.
So I called, and if any of you have had to deal with them, I hope that you have had the same experience that we did, because they are the nicest human beings I've ever encountered, ever in my life. From the first phone call to speak to a representative and find out like what we need to give them in order for him to be a patient of theirs, I knew that that was like going to be the thing to save him. I knew that, they were just so kind. And I told the woman on the phone, I was like, I don't know what you need from me, and this is scary and new, and like we don't even have an official diagnosis, but they're pretty sure. And she was just so sweet, and she goes, okay, all right, don't worry about it. And like I told her our insurance, and she goes, well, we take 100%, we cooperate with that, and don't worry about it. She started like a file on him, and she goes, the only thing we need is the bone marrow biopsy. So once you have that, call me. they'll fax it over, and we can begin treatment immediately. And I was like, okay. Because he was supposed to be meeting with this oncologist to do the bone marrow biopsy, like, that week.
Yeah.
And at this point, it's, like, close to July.
Yeah. It's,
It was the weekend before the 4th.
Right. And, bone marrow biopsies are not fun, by the way.
I mean, I wouldn't know.
If anyone's had them, they're not pain. They're very uncomfortable. It's just feeling a discomfort. I remember saying to you, it feels like someone's taking my bones and kind of just like rubbing them together, which is, I remember that feeling. I'm getting that feeling right now, and it's kind of wigging me out, so I'm just going to stop talking about that, but it's not fun. And this is right around my birthday.
It was, so his birthday is July 8th,
Yeah.
and we have an appointment with this. He was a hematologist and oncologist with a small practice on Long Island, and part of the network that his primary care provider's with. So we get an appointment with them the week before the 4th, and we go in, and you know, I'm there, his dad's there, my mom's there, and they take him in to meet the doctor. They wouldn't let us in, COVID. And then I said to the girl, like, so they bring him in, and then the nurse comes out, and she goes, okay, parents can go in. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, can I go in? And she goes, no, only parents right now. And I said, I'm his wife. And she goes, oh, I thought you were his sister. I'm like, I told you that I was his wife when I walked in here. So, like, she knew. So, like, that was just immediately, like, not fair. Also, they wouldn't let you sit in the waiting room.
Out
So,
in the
like,
hallway.
it's like an office building, and like they had a doctor's office in this building, and so they have a waiting room, and like, okay, socially distant, COVID, masks, all that stuff, like, fine. And we didn't have to be allowed to sit in the waiting room, but like all these other people were allowed to sit in the waiting room except him. They made him sit out in the hallway in this like really uncomfortable chair, and it just kind of felt like, why can't he sit in the waiting room with other patients? Like, it was just very weird. And so they bring him in, and then finally the nurse is like, okay, well, you know, fine, you're his wife, you can go in. So I go in, and his dad goes in, and we're sitting there, and we're not even in an exam room, we're in the doctor's office.
His office, yeah.
And he's sitting, and we're sitting like this, and like the doctor's where you guys would be, and so he's like dripping like profusely,
slightly embarrassed,
dripping, right? And I'm like looking at him, and I'm like, are you okay? And like they didn't offer him water, like nothing. And like the doctor has this like glass of Coke with like ice, and the condensation is like dripping down, and like we're just staring at it, and like he takes a sip, and he's like, and Dan's like literally,
all I can think is like, I just want to rip that out of your hands and drink
like,
it.
And you're not even like offering him a drink. Like, I was like, oh my god, this is horrible. So we're sitting there, and his doctor's like reviewing his like charts, right? And he's like, oh, well, your blood work this, your blood work that, blah 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 blah. And he's like, we're gonna get your life back. Don't worry, we're gonna get your life back. And we're sitting there like, all right, let's go. What do we gotta do? Because like we don't know, right? Like we don't know like what we have to do. We're not doctors, so we're like, what are we doing? And he's just like, we're gonna take care of it. Okay, I'm gonna schedule you for a bone marrow biopsy this Friday at like 4:30 in the afternoon. And we're like, okay, we'll be here. Like, you know, and like they tell us what to do and like this and that. So we leave. 5 minutes. We drove like 40 minutes for 5 minutes with this like doctor who like made him suffer.
Basically told me, yeah, we'll get this taken care of. Don't worry.
Yeah. Like,
couldn't do that over the phone, I guess.
Ridiculous. And so then we go back for the bone marrow biopsy that Friday.
We thought, at least.
They bring him in. They do blood work. They bring me and his dad in. We're sitting in an exam room. Nurse comes in, takes his blood pressure, does like all kinds of questions, like all this stuff. Then the doctor comes in. Well, we're not going to do the bone marrow biopsy today because I don't want the specimen to sit over the weekend.
And at this point, I am desperate for the pain to go away, the sweating to go away. I'm desperate to sleep. I'm desperate for answers. I'm desperate. I'm just desperate for any good news. And to get this nonchalant, well, we can't really do it today. We'll try again next week.
There's no pickup over, you know, like.
And I'm like, I can't make it another week. I can't make it another weekend.
The next week was
make it.
the week of the 4th. And so we were like, what do you mean? Like,
Mhm.
why did you book this appointment then? If you knew you couldn't do it on a Friday at 4:30 because you didn't want the specimen to sit over the weekend, why did you book this? And we were really angry and, like, frustrated. And I remember, like, being escorted out of the room and the doctor, like, put his hand, like, on my back. It's like, you know, like, comfort me, I guess. And I remember just being like, you know, like, because I just felt like you are not, like, on my team. I didn't feel like he understood the urgency that was occurring. And at this point, too, he's not eating. And he's had at least one fall.
Yeah, so
he fell on the stairs.
I had 2 falls at this point, and not like.
Well, not at this point, because the second one was later.
Yeah, but over the course of me being home before everything, I had 2 falls. I had one in like the den.
That was the second one.
That was the second one. Okay, the first one was the
stairs.
Okay, so when I was trying to go up and down from couch to couch and bringing the fan with me,
like I told you not to do.
Like you told me not to.
I told him to let me help him because
I didn't care.
He
I
at
was
that
like,
point
nope,
too. He was kind of unsteady on his feet, and he's just like clumsy anyway. But like
my right leg was getting a little weaker.
Yeah, and like his knee would buckle, and so we were like, me and my mom were like looking it up, and we're like, okay, this is normal for lymphoma. Like if that's what you have, like sometimes you get weakness and like blah blah blah. But like we didn't think it was anything that like. Because we thought we were on a path to, like, getting treatment. We thought that we were close to, like, things fixing. And so we didn't really understand the urgency of what those symptoms meant in that moment. So we were like, okay, this is just, like, a thing we have to deal with. So he's going down the stairs, carrying all this his knee buckles, and he, like, falls flat on his ass. Like, at the top of the steps. Now, he didn't go all the way down the steps, right?
No, it was about 3 steps that I fell down, and even then I was like, I'm fine.
And so like I come down, and he's like on the couch, and I'm like, what? And he's like, you're gonna be mad at me, and I'm like, why? And he's like, I fell, and I'm like,
yeah,
are you kidding me? Sweet. Like, and I was mad at you,
yeah,
because that was stupid, but like understanding too that he wasn't thinking correctly because he was in so much pain.
I knew there was a chance I could fall, but I was so uncomfortable I didn't care.
Yeah.
I was like, no, this is what I need to do. And like, this is going to work.
And at that moment, like, I happened to be sleeping, and I think that he also was like, she needs to sleep.
This is like 7 a.m.
Yeah, and he's like, she needs, like, sleep, so I'm not going to bother her to, like, just walk down the stairs. Meanwhile, I'm, like, not sleeping because I'm so worried about him that it wouldn't have mattered, you know, but it doesn't.
Yeah. And then there's my birthday, which...
Well... We're not there yet.
We're not there yet?
No, because so then he
goes... how long is this?
So then he goes back for the bone marrow biopsy the next week. And I think the 4th was on a... Hold on, let me check.
We'll wait.
You know what? The 4th was on a Saturday this past year. So he went in... So Friday was like the observance day, right? So like they were closed on the Friday. So we went in on Thursday for the bone marrow biopsy. We get it done. No, we went in on Monday. I'm sorry. We went in on Monday. I remember because I remember when we left that other Friday when they didn't do the bone marrow biopsy, we spoke to like the nurse who was like doing the like, you know, receptionist, and she was so nice, and she was like, oh, okay, well, the doctor does virtual appointments until 12 on Mondays, but maybe we can make an exception for the bone marrow biopsy. And we're standing there like...
Please do.
you had best because like he's going to die. It was like not to be morbid, but like that's kind of where we were at. We were like, well, like what?
Yeah.
Like why is this like taking so long? So they do it the Monday at like 8 a.m. We go, we come back, they do it, whatever. Then we think like they're like, okay, you'll have results like tomorrow or like Wednesday. We didn't. And so we're like, the hell? So we're calling like every day, and then they wouldn't give us an answer. And they're like, well, part of the radiology report is in, but not all of it. And like, I'm talking to the receptionist and I'm like, who do I need to call? I'm like, I'll call the lab. Like, where'd you send it? I'll call the lab. Do you have the phone number to the lab? And she actually said to me, I don't know what lab we send things to. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Don't lie to me. Like, I'm not stupid. Like, do you think I'm that dumb? Of course you know where it went. You just don't want me to know. So then she calls the lab, and the lab gets on the phone. They, like, patched them in. And this guy gets on, and he was very nice, but he was like, yeah, we're still testing it, and, like, because of the holiday weekend, like, we couldn't test it all, like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but the whole point was that, like, it wasn't supposed to sit. So now, like, you let it sit over the holiday weekend, which was, like, a 4-day weekend. Like, what is going on? And we were really frustrated. So then we finally get the news Monday before his birthday, so the 6th, at night. And the doctor, does a FaceTime. And he goes, like, it's lymphoma. And he goes, but it's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So it's diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which is not like in your lymph nodes. It's a bone cancer, so it's in your bone marrow, which is why on the MRI and the CT scans, it looked metastasized because once it's there, it's like everywhere. And it was really, like when he got diagnosed, he was stage 4. It was everywhere.
All in my body.
Everywhere. So it was 2 days before his birthday, and we got our diagnosis. So I called Sloan, and then this place, they wouldn't send over the radiology report. They wouldn't send it over. They wouldn't give it to us. They wouldn't send it to Sloan. We called them every day. I said, I'll drive there. I'll pick it up. Like. And Sloan was like, we're calling them, and they're like, we can't do anything, we need the radiology report, and they're reaching out to this doctor, like, they just wouldn't give it to us. And it was like 2 weeks that he didn't get any treatment, and he's like dying on our couch. And then he had another fall on it. I think it was the night of his birthday.
Yeah.
Which is the 8th.
Yep. And so for my birthday, we had my family over, your family obviously, and I spent the whole time on the couch, laying down, and I had to have a cake brought over to me. And blow out candles while laying down on the couch.
And like, it got to a point where he was having so much trouble walking. My dad went out and bought him a walker just so he had like something, because he was alone downstairs most of the night, and like,
yeah,
we were afraid he was gonna get hurt, and he couldn't shower. Like, I had to like hold him up in the shower, and I had to hold him up like to wash his hands because his leg just kind of like went, and we didn't know what to do, and then
I remember, just to get all the sad parts out, I remember on 4th of July I really just wanted to see fireworks.
And we could like hear them all, outside. And it was like a big year because of COVID. Like, everybody had fireworks, and he loves fireworks. And he just wanted to see them, and I felt terrible. So we went outside and I held him up from behind to like have him stand to see them. And then he was in so much pain that he couldn't stand anymore. So he sat down on our lawn, and it was just, you know, in that moment, it was the worst moment because I just felt so helpless. I couldn't do anything for him, and
yeah,
it kind of felt like I was gonna lose him. It felt like I was going to, like, this was like the last thing I could do for him, you know, because we couldn't get the help we needed. And so finally, like 2 weeks later, my dad's business partner happens to also have lymphoma.
yeah.
But he's older, and he's on maintenance chemo and everything. Like, he will never be cured, but he's been going to Sloan for so many years, and his doctor happens to be the head of the lymphoma department, and he bombarded this doctor.
Yeah,
bombarded him and like begged him and begged him and begged him.
There are people throughout this whole process who have been tremendous and a big help, and one of them is your dad's partner, Mike, who played a very, very small role, but a very, very important role. Because he reached out to my doctor and basically begged him to see him because he's got a lot going on.
And at that point too, I'm fighting to get the radiology report. I'm fighting the pathology report, like whatever it's called. I'm fighting to get everything so that I could get him the help he needs. And like they're just like there's nothing, like they're just not answering me, blowing me off, like it's horrible. And so at that point it was like a Friday, and he goes to me, I feel tingling like in my face. And I'm like,
the left side of my face.
You know, I'm like, what? And then like an hour later, his face was like this, and his eye wouldn't close, and like I thought he had a stroke. You know, and my parents are like, he's fine, he didn't have a stroke, it's okay. And they're like trying to calm me down because I'm like a freaking nervous wreck. But I'm like, look at him, like he's not okay. Like his face is like this. I'm like, he's not okay. And they're like, I know, okay, we know he's not okay, but like, you know, and he's like, I'm fine. You know, like it was just like not. It was horrible,
yeah.
And I'm like afraid he's gonna die. And then that Monday, this doctor,
we had a video call with him.
He texted him, and he goes, we need to have a video call, like, you know, now. And this doctor looked at him and said, get in the car, go to Memorial Sloan in Manhattan, you're being admitted now. And like that day, like leave now, like when can you get there, leave now. And we were like, okay. And I'm like, throw in a backpack, and he's like, you should pack for like 5 days. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, throw in a backpack, and like all, you know, and my dad came home from work, like it was just like we drove, and
so I've got the nerve damage. I've got twitching.
He started twitching in his sleep.
When I did get some sleep, I would twitch a little bit. I didn't realize this at the time, but now in hindsight, it's very obvious. I was hearing things.
Oh, we forgot about the fentanyl.
Yeah. So fentanyl. So.
I'm sorry. You keep scooching over, and I keep like leaning into you.
I want you to show off your beautiful mug here. It's Winnie the Pooh.
Mhm.
Yeah. So fentanyl is what is fentanyl?
Something you should never take. So this is what happened. So we need to backtrack a bit, and I apologize. When he got diagnosed, he was talking to this oncologist about how terrible his back pain is, and is there anything he can give him? And the doctor was like, you mean like Tylenol isn't working? And we're like, no. And he goes, oh, okay, I don't mind prescribing you something stronger. So he prescribed him fentanyl. We called the pharmacy and to see if it was ready, and the pharmacist goes, yeah, I mean, we have it, but you know, it's like $240 because you haven't met your deductible yet. And I was like, okay. And so I go to him, I'm like, do you really feel like you need this? Because it's like $240. And he took out his debit card, excuse me, and handed it to me and said, I don't give a what it costs. Go pick it up. And I was like, okay. And I felt like I didn't have the right to tell him no, because I was uneasy about it because it's a patch. And so I was like very nervous because I knew it was very strong. And I was like, but I didn't feel like it was my place to tell him, because he was in so much pain, what to do and like how to handle it. So I went and I picked it up with my mom, and I said to the pharmacist, I was like, look, I'm like, my husband literally just got diagnosed with cancer, and they prescribed him this for his back pain. I'm like, what can you like tell me about it? And the pharmacist was like, this is really intense. It's a really strong like narcotic patch, and he's like, it's really, I don't recommend people take it, but if he's in that much pain, like maybe. And I said, well, can he take it with anything else? And he was like, absolutely, like do not take it with anything else. He's like, you can, but don't, like, you know, whatever. So I'm like, okay. So we go home and I slap that bad boy on him. And like the patch, by the way, is like this big, right? And like, it's like, you have to peel it off. It's literally a sticker.
Goes on the back.
Yeah, I mean, like, and they're like, yeah, don't, and I'm like reading all the like stuff about it, and it's like, don't touch it with your fingers because you could overdose, and like all this stuff. And I'm like, so like, how am I supposed to put it on him? So I had to wear like winter gloves to like put this thing on him because I'm like afraid of like touching it. And like, then it's like, if it falls off, like don't put it back on, but don't put a new one on. Like you have to wait 3 days, like, because the patch is good for 3 days. It was like just like crazy. So we put it on, and he kind of slept that night. So the fentanyl was a hell no. So he went a couple days without it, and then it got so bad that we put it back. And then he started doing this thing where he would like be half sleeping, like on the couch. And like, so first of all, like he was twitching, right? So he would be like this, like on the couch, like laying down, and he would be like, right? And like his fingers would be like twitching like that, like looking like he's trying to play like the saxophone. And I was
Which
like,
I did play.
Yeah. And I was like, but then his arm started going like up a little bit, like almost like he was trying to grab something, and I was always like, you good?
What are you doing?
Yeah. And then one time my parents and my sister went out for like something or other, and so we were alone in the house, and he was asleep, and all of a sudden he woke up and he would go like, what? And I was like sitting across from him, and I'm like, look up from my book, and I'm like, what? And he was like, didn't your mom just call me? And I'm like, no. And he goes, well, I heard her talking in the kitchen with my mom. And I'm like, we've been home alone for an hour. Like, and it's not funny because at the time it was really scary, but like now we can laugh about it a little bit because.
And I was convinced you were wrong, by the way.
Yeah.
I was like, no, your mom definitely just said something to me.
And I'm like, she's been literally out of the house for an hour. Like an hour. Like, no, you know, it was really scary. And so more and more that started happening. And that is a side effect of the fentanyl. And so I knew, the question became, did the cancer go to your brain versus is it a side effect of the fentanyl? And we didn't have an answer for that. And, you know, but fast forward, okay, so we get in the car, we're going to Sloan Kettering, and the fertility, the hospital calls us, and they're like, you know, you need to do fertility preservation because we're young and have no children, and chemo can, you know, make you unable to have children, so we needed to plan for that. And his doctor was very, like, we had just met the man an hour ago on the phone, and he was like already thinking about this, so we were like, oh, okay. So they sent us to a fertility clinic like a block away from Sloan Kettering, but like we knew that he wasn't going to be able to do that because
still in back pain. My right leg really,
couldn't walk.
I can't walk.
We had to carry him basically to the car.
Yeah, so we were in front of the building, ready to go inside for the sperm fertility, and
I went in to see if there was a wheelchair, and they didn't
have a wheelchair. So the only way that I was going to get into the building was to be, to walk in, and I couldn't make it out of the car. I couldn't take a step on my feet. I could not walk 10, 15 feet to the building.
And it was there were two moments throughout this whole thing where I distinctly have imprinted on my brain his face. One of them was a mental breakdown he had here right before he went for his MRI, and I remember him crying, and his eyes are green, if you guys can't tell, but they were like really green, and he was crying, saying, "I'm scared," and and I just remember like grabbing his face, and like I didn't know what to do, but like that moment sticks with me forever. And the other one that sticks with me forever is when I came out of the building without a wheelchair and just seeing he was like half sitting in the back seat of the car with the door open, and my dad was like talking to him, and just seeing his face of like utter despair when I told him there was no wheelchair, and he was just like, because he was just so sick and so out of it, and I knew that like he wanted to be able to do this for our future, and it was just
couldn't get in the building.
No. And so we called them back, and we were like, look, he can't, we're just coming straight to the building. And they were like, okay, we'll take care of it here, don't worry, like you have options, it's okay. So we get there, and we have to bring him to like I guess it's an emergency room.
It was the emergency area.
Yeah, like
entrance.
I don't really, I wasn't allowed in. So yeah. They bring a wheelchair out.
They had a wheelchair.
Yeah, well, Sloan is very good at that. They have a wheelchair. They come to the car. He gets in the wheelchair. I go in with him. I have like his backpack, right? And like I can't go into like the emergency room area with him. So I at that point like am not allowed to go further. And so he's sitting there, and we're telling like the receptionist like, look, like we were just on the phone with doctor, and we know he's being admitted, and like this and that. And so the woman was like, all right, well you can't go in, and this and that. And so I'm holding his like backpack with all his shit, and he's like, and I'm like, okay, and we're like, they let us like say goodbye kind of. And so then he went in, and then I'm like standing there, and the nurse came out a few minutes later to talk to me, and she goes, okay, well, I was like, I'm pretty sure he's being admitted. And I'm like holding his bag like this. Like, I'm pretty sure he's being admitted. And she was like, I checked, he is being admitted. We just have to get him a room. She's like, but it's not going to be for a while. These are our visiting hours. FYI, COVID visiting hours for any hospital is 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. and one person a day. And that's it. And like, it's hard.
Yeah.
But so at this point, it's like maybe noon, right? So like we know that I'm not gonna see him until at least tomorrow. So I'm like, okay. And I said to her, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, should I go home? I live on Long Island. Like, should I go home or should I stay here and like wait? And she was like, you should go home. And she was like so nice, but like also you could tell she was like kind of pitying me because I was kind of like a deer, like a baby deer, just like standing there, like I don't know. And I was like, I have his bag, and she's like, okay, I'll take him his bag. I'm like, okay. And she's like, it was like just one of those things where you just don't know what to do. Like you need people to just like tell you like, this is what's going to happen and this is what you need to do. Like,
yeah, and I remember being on the other side of that door, and I've never been I've been in a hospital for other people. I've never been myself in a hospital to be taken care of, and it's during COVID, and it's just very, I don't know, I still don't fully know to what extent is going on. And I remember just being dropped off, and I remember just sitting there in the wheelchair just kind of looking around like, I don't know what to do. And I remember, and luckily you don't need to make those calls in a hospital. Somebody comes by and tells you where you're going. Yeah. And it was a little scary. And they brought me to the exam room where, they ran a COVID test on me again.
Which Dan is a big fan of, by the way.
You see, you've never had one.
Dan, you're right, I have not had one. Thankfully,
you haven't needed to have
I
one.
haven't needed to have one, but Dan has had many a COVID test.
Up
just
the nose.
only because like with Sloan, you know, they are very diligent, and like every time you go to a hospital now, like they test you every 3 days if you're admitted. So like his hospital stays were so long. He was getting like 2 or 3 each time, and
so we got I got dropped off at the hospital at like 12, and I was in the exam room. I want to say waiting for a room until about like 7 or 8. It was nighttime.
But in the meantime, they gave him morphine. So the first night, whatever, he's fine. He's on morphine. He's fine. The next day, and this is more out. It leads into your hallucination. Okay, so we had opted that day. He's in a room with somebody. He has a roommate, and they called me. They asked me the day before, like we were on the phone back and forth, the fertility thing. We were given the option of either he could try to manually make, what's the word?
You get where we're going.
Yeah, like, okay, like to preserve, right? Like,
we're all adults. We can use our imagination. We know where we're going.
Like that was the option, or we could do. There are 2 procedures. Now, the 2 procedures, there's an EEJ, and then there's a TESI. We had talked about it, and like basically they call me for these things because like he's like on morphine and completely out of it, and like so he was also doing this thing where he would be like, because he was so like not, he was very aware of how ill he was feeling, so he would say like, call my wife. And so they called me to say like, look, your husband what do you think he would want to do? And I was like, knowing him, I was like, you know what, you should just do the procedures. We're not going to do the first thing because I know it's not going to happen. And so they were like, okay. That was the first day. That was the day he got admitted. Then the next morning they called me at like 7 a.m. So of course I think he's like dead, right? So like, because why is a hospital calling me at like 7 a.m.? And so they call me and they're like, we don't know if we can do the procedure. We don't know if the fertility specialist is going to be available, and he really needs to start treatment, and like blah, 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 blah. And so they're like, you really need to come in to do the first option. And I'm like, okay. So I call my father-in-law and I'm like, what are you doing today? And he's like, nothing. Why? And I'm like, you want to drive me into Manhattan? Because, and like I had to explain to him like what, so it's like awkward, you know, because I'm like explaining to like my parents and my in-laws, like, this is what I have to go do. So he gets moved into an isolation room to give us privacy. And so we get there and like I have all this paperwork to fill out and like all this crap. And like he didn't even know I was coming. He came, I was in the room before he was, and he comes in, they wheel him in, and he's like, hey! And I'm like,
I'm just happy to see anyone.
I was like, hi! And he's like, what's up? What are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, well, you know. So, that did not work.
No.
That didn't work. So then they were like, okay, we're going to have to, like, squeeze him in for, like, the EEJ and the TESI and, like, you know, whatever. So, at that point, though, like, I'm visiting with him. You know, we have 4 hours. And so, but he's still walking. So, like, he gets, his nurse's name was Tim. This dude was huge. And I mean huge, like, buff. Like,
football.
Like, he looked like a Ken doll. I mean, like, he really did. Like, and he was the nicest guy. And Dan was, like, in love with him because he was like, yeah, if I fall, this guy's going to carry me.
I had a man crush because this is the only guy, the only nurse there who, like, if I fell, this guy had me. Like, I wasn't hitting the ground. Everybody else was like a twig and like tiny, and they just would have like, I would have crushed them when I fell.
Yeah.
This guy could have carried me everywhere.
Yeah, and he was great. He was great.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. So he was still walking at that point. So then like, I'm visiting with him, and he pulls his legs up like this on the bed, and all of a sudden he's screaming.
I felt a pop. It's the only way I could describe it to the nurses. They really didn't understand what happened. All I could tell them was I pulled my right leg up, and I just felt, and I think I even heard a pop.
He goes to me, did you hear that? And I'm like, no. And he's like screaming, like in pain, and I like run out of the room, and I'm like, can someone please come in here? He's screaming. And they're like looking at me like, okay, yeah, lady, like everybody else on this floor is also screaming. But I was like I didn't know what to do. So like they come in and like they're looking and they're like feeling around his leg, and it was like right up like near like the groin area.
Yeah.
So we were like, what the so then we're thinking like he popped a tendon. We never got like an official answer on that, but we kind of pieced together like what we think happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and but it was like so then he was on morphine, right? So then he couldn't walk at all because his leg hurt so bad, and he like basically lost like muscle and like movement, like motility.
My
in that
right leg was basically like dead weight.
He couldn't lift it like barely. He couldn't like flex his foot or his ankle. Like he couldn't do anything. And so we were like,
yeah,
what the is going on? So like that was like a whole nother thing. Then that night he calls me at like 11.
All right. So here's where the fun begins. This is the hallucinations, and I had plenty. So the first hallucination I had was in that isolation room, and they give you like a green plastic bag.
It's a biohazard bag
to put clothes in.
It was his day clothes because he was in like gowns and stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know who because it obviously couldn't have been me. Somebody put this green plastic bag on the windowsill.
It was me. I put it there.
Okay, you.
Didn't think it was a big deal.
So at night when it's like bedtime, I'm laying in bed looking at the bag on the windowsill. And I don't know why I thought this, but I thought you were there. I thought you were hiding behind or underneath the bag.
I thought you said I was in the bag.
Or in the bag. You were near the bag, hiding with the bag somehow. And I remember saying to you, I was convinced that you were there, and I remember saying to him, I'm like, Victoria, you need to move. They're obviously going to see you there. You need to move. And I was like trying to get you to come over to me, and you just weren't listening to me. And I thought you were mad at me for something. I couldn't figure out why you were just ignoring me. So I finally, I'm like calling you for like 10-15 minutes, trying to say like, you need to move. They're going to find you. You need to move. And I finally give up. And when I gave up trying to convince you to move, this green plastic bag turned into a monster. I'll say that again. It turned into a monster in front of my eyes. And it started threatening me. And I mean huge, like bigger than the room. Like the room grew. And I remember it threatening me that you were going to die. I was going to die if I didn't confess.
To what?
I don't know.
What did you do?
I still have no idea what I did. I don't know what I was confessing to. But that's what it told me. So I knew I had to confess to you. I don't know what I was confessing, but I knew I had to call you.
Yeah.
So I immediately, after the bag goes away, which it did, I called Victoria, and I was freaking out.
And he goes to me, and I'm like walking up the stairs to go to bed, and he goes, hey, and I'm like so happy to hear from him, and I'm like, hey, and he goes, hey, where are you? And immediately I knew, I'm like something's wrong. I'm like, there's something, he's messed up. Like there's something wrong because he knows where I am. He knows I'm home, and I'm like, I'm home, and like so, just for like a point of reference, I've known 3 of my grandparents. One of them passed before I was born. All 3 of them have had dementia or like Alzheimer's. So for most of my life, and 2 of them are gone now. One of them is still with us, but I'm very, very well versed in memory issues, cognitive issues. So I'm very attuned to when something isn't right with someone mentally, and I also know how to speak to you, right? So like not pry, but like probe you with questions to kind of gauge where you're at. So I immediately know something's wrong, and I immediately go, I'm home, where are you? Like to try to figure out where he is, right? Like mentally, like does he know where he is? Like things like that. So he goes, I think I'm at the hospital. And I say, yeah, you're at the hospital. You know, you have cancer. And he's like, yeah. And then he's like, I was worried about you because, and he like is going into this like story. He tells me about the bag. And I'm like, okay. And I said to him, I was like, Dan, you're hallucinating. And he's like, yeah. And I said, no. I'm like, you are hallucinating. I need you to know and understand that it's from the morphine. I'm like, this is not real. The bag is not real. Like, it's just a bag. You know, like, I was going through this stuff. I was like, you have to understand that. And he's like, I know. Okay. He's like, okay, so I'm hallucinating. And it kind of felt like, if you've seen, like, the Hunger Games, you probably won't remember, but like PETA, when he like gets like not crazy, but like, you know, when he goes through, they poison him with the venom, and then he would go to Katniss and he'd be like, real or not real, and she would like tell him whether it's real or not real. That's like literally what we did. He'd be like, is that a hallucination? I'm like, yeah, or like, no.
So next one that I had,
it
actually happened earlier in the day. I don't know why, but I thought you were like a famous actress, and you were doing a movie in Japan, and for somehow, some way, at I guess like at a party or something, you pissed off the Yakuza.
As I'm known to do.
I remember getting an MRI, and I was hallucinating that the Yakuza was after Victoria, and they were going to kill her. And we can laugh about this now because you did not piss off the Yakuza, and nobody that I know of is going to kill you. But I remember telling you that as well, like, that you pissed somebody off.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, you're going to die. We're going to die. We're both going to die.
Yeah.
So then, after I get off the phone with you for the green monster hallucination, I'm looking out my window in my room, and I got a big window looking out into buildings, the city, and I kept seeing, I don't know what other way to describe this other than an African water pageant parade going by the window. There were floats going by, there were people dancing and cheering and celebrating.
He called me back to tell me this.
I could see them going by my window.
He called me back to tell me about the African water pageant outside his window.
No, I'm in New York City.
And
there's no water.
He wasn't on the river. Like, he wasn't near any water.
There's no water near me, but I could see...
I had been there earlier that day. There was no water outside his window. Like, no.
But I could see these floats going by and these lights and fire and people celebrating and cheering. It literally looked like you took Rivers of Light and brought it to the hospital.
And he was like, and I'm like, well, you know that's not real, right? And he's like, yeah, I know. And
I'm like,
okay,
I know.
As long as you know.
But the thing is that knowing it's not real doesn't make it go away.
And so I'm like, again, I go, did you tell your nurse that you're hallucinating? No, they haven't come in yet. I'm like, well, you need, you know. So I'm like frustrated because, like, they don't know, right? So I'm like, they should probably know, you know?
Yeah, and then the last big hallucination that I had was a costly one.
Okay, well, wait, but so before that, so that night, he's like telling me like all these little things, like he saw like Mario and Luigi like
in the windows
of other buildings, like bouncing around.
Yeah, from Super Mario Brothers, I saw them jumping around.
Dwight.
I saw Dwight from The Office in the hallways, but he never came into my room, but I could hear him. And I knew he was outside.
And he was like telling me, he's like, Dwight's looking in my window. And
yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then
there was a man behind one of my doors peeking out.
And then there was a dog in another building. And
a giant dog, like a Clifford, the big red dog kind of dog.
He was like, there's this dog and it's too big for the apartment. And I'm like,
how's it gonna get out?
Yeah,
He's
like
too big.
It was really, and he's like, there's a DJ outside. Like there was like all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And then so I'm like, okay, so I go, Dan, I'm like, you need to tell your nurse. And he's like, okay, but I know he's like not going to. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna hang up with you and I'm gonna call you back. And he goes, okay. So I call the nurse's station and I'm like, hi, yeah, I need to talk to his nurse because and so they put her on and she's like, I said, I just want to let you know that he's hallucinating and he's seeing things and like I don't know if he told you, but I don't think he did. And she goes, he did not tell me that. And she goes, thank you, and hung up and like ran to his room. And then like 5 minutes later, he calls me back and he goes, I told my nurse. She came in. I'm like, no, sweetie. I told your nurse.
I told your nurse.
I was like, she came to check on you. But yeah.
And then the last hallucination that I had, it was the next morning. I was sleeping. I am sleeping by this point.
From the morphine.
And I kept going in and out of sleep. From current day, and like Flintstones, like the cartoon, the Flintstones time period, back and forth between current day Flintstones. And somehow during the hallucination, I managed to get out of bed with a leg that doesn't work, take out my IV, climb over the bed railing, take a couple steps, and I fall right on my right hip. Crash on the floor. No stumbling. Literally just fall out of my feet, land right on my right leg.
So he called me while he was on the floor, telling me that he fell, and I'm like, okay. And
literally,
I'm like,
as they're picking me up.
He's like, they're picking me up. There's doctors in here now, and I'm being put back on the bed. And I'm like, well, what happened? I'm like, did you hit your head? Like, like what happened? And he's like, kind of not able to like verbalize what exactly happened. So then I call the nurse's station. I'm like, what's going on? So like by this point though, he has a different nurse. His name is James. He was like a really nice guy, and I have to say, knew his shit. And he was very good about any time I came in, which was pretty much every day, to like make sure doctors came and spoke to me, because normally they make their rounds in the morning, but of course like I can't be there in the morning. So he was like, okay, I'm gonna get a doctor for you, because like he can't tell me anything. Like he has no like, he's just like, okay, yeah, sure, like you want to stick that up my ass, like yeah, but like he had like no concept of what was like really sorry.
No, I was just totally up for that.
Yeah. So now he's like not allowed to get up. He's a full risk. He's non-weight bearing on his leg. Like he has his fracture. So it's his lesser trochanter. So what that is like your ball and socket in your hip. The big ball is your greater trochanter, and the smaller one is your lesser. And so that like popped off his like leg. And like from what they told me, if like a healthy typical person were to have that happen, you would just walk around your whole life and maybe not even know it, and like it would be totally fine, and there would probably be no reason for anything. Because of him, he had what they call lymphatic lesions, which is like the cancer eating away at the bone. The bone is very soft
Brittle.
and spongy and brittle. So for him, it was like, it's a big deal. So they didn't want to risk him walking, because they didn't want to risk further damage to either his pelvis or his legs. So he was non-weight bearing at this point. So what we think actually happened is the day that we went in and he felt that pop, that's what I think the fracture is, because he did not pop a tendon, and no one's ever mentioned it ever again. There's no evidence that he's popped a tendon. I think that the fracture occurred earlier that day, and then when he tried to get up, just because his bones were so soft and everything, and I think that when he tried to get up, he fell because he had all those issues with his legs. And at this point too, we're finding out he has a blood clot in his right leg, like in his calf. So all of these things are like occurring, and we're finding them out. And the reason he got a blood clot is because cancer like puts you more at risk, and also he was literally laying on our couch for a month doing nothing. So there's all these things that were happening. So I don't think the fracture happened when he fell. I think the fracture happened earlier the day before, and he had not tried to get up, so he didn't fall. I think the fall just was unfortunate, but it led us to be aware of the fracture, and they were going to do surgery to like screw that little piece of bone back in. Thankfully that did not happen, and he does not need that surgery because he's been fine, and
Yeah. No more morphine.
Yeah, they were like, no, that's not good for you.
Take me off the morphine. Hallucinations stop. I'm starting to remember more once they get me off the morphine.
Yeah.
I can remember more. And And then this is where the first round of chemo
So
starts.
they told us originally that he was going to get a very intense chemo that was a 5-day treatment, and he was going to be admitted. You know, you're always admitted for your first round of any kind of chemo that you get. So we knew he was going to be there regardless. But the first one we thought he was going to get was going to be called an IVAC, which is a very old and intense chemo regimen, and you can only get it twice. You can only get this particular round of chemo twice in your life, period. And so and the side effects are so severe. And so his doctor called me and while I was with him, and he was like, this is going to be the worst 3 weeks of your life. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be hard. It's going to be all of these things. You should prepare. He's going to be readmitted. He's going to have low blood counts, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh my God. Then the next day I go in as they're beginning his chemo, and his bed was elevated, and there was the nurse and the charge nurse, and I walk in and there's like this big giant vial of like this red stuff, and he looks at me and he's like, hey. We come in and they switched him to RCHOP, which is way less intense, but that wasn't the R of the RCHOP, but I don't know, whatever. So but they gave it to him over the course of 2 days because you have.
I also didn't realize I was getting chemo.
Yeah.
When I was getting chemo.
Yeah.
Like
he had no idea. I was like, "Are you getting chemo?" And he's like, "Am I? I don't know."
I thought they
and
were
like,
prepping me, but no, they already begun.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, okay."
So he was like, you know, like it was just like kind of weird. Like it's one of those things where you like walk in and you see like someone in a way that you just feel like you're not ever gonna see them. Like it was just a weird feeling and like weird visual for me. Like I don't know, but so they switched him to RCHOP because they felt like because the other one is so much stronger, they didn't want to lead with that because they kind of felt like there was no reason to. The RCHOP basically gives the same results. It's just way less intense in terms of side effects, like the nausea and everything like that. So they switched him to that. And they didn't like tell us originally how many rounds he was supposed to get. We just like knew, and we kind of just were like, okay, like, you know, and we knew from like looking online that typically stage 4 you get like either 6 or 8. So we're like, he's gonna get 8, you know, like of course, like he's gonna get 8. He ended up only getting 6.
Yeah.
But it was just the first one, like he reacted so well. Like they gave it to him over the course of 2 days because they start you off very slowly, and the rituximab in it is highly reactive, so they give you Benadryl and Tylenol with it to make sure that you don't have an allergic reaction. So that they give it to you over like 3 hours, I think the first 2 times, and then every time after that it's an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So it was like very long. So that day he got half of his treatment, then the next day his mom went to go visit him and he got his other half, and he handled it well. Like he just slept basically through the whole thing.
I didn't feel anything. I didn't notice anything different.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like I was just resting.
Yeah.
Almost. So I get my first round of chemo, and I'm still at Memorial Sloan, and I was there for 9 days.
Yeah.
It felt like 9 weeks. It felt like I was there forever.
9 days is a long time to be in the hospital anyway.
I felt like, and I remember towards the end of it, every day I was like, I need to go home. I've been here too long. I need to go home.
He also has this thing we didn't know, but he like really hated needles. And if you've ever been in a hospital, you know that you basically get no sleep because they just are like poking you every couple hours. And so he would call me like crying.
They love to draw blood.
He was crying like, I need to go home. I don't want to be here. Like all this stuff. And so like it was just hard.
I just missed being home.
Yeah.
Feeling back to like a normal life
Yeah.
of some kind. So for 9 days I'm horizontal. I'm not getting up and moving. I'm not going for a walk or anything. Like I'm just resting, laying in bed for 9 days. And I'm not able to stand. And that's what
he can't put any
because I can't put any weight on the right leg. So I'm just laying down for 9 days straight, and your body doesn't want to do that. You really doesn't want to do that. So they brought physical therapy to the hospital to try to get me up in some way to get blood flowing and everything, and try to move around. Um, and that's when they introduced the sliding board, which I don't have with me right now, but it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a board. It's a wood board that transfers you from a bed to a chair.
Yeah, so you scoot your butt across it. I think we talked about that.
Yeah, and that was the first movement that I've been able to do in 9 days or longer, because at home I wasn't really moving around all that much. So anytime I use the sliding board to go from like the bed to the chair and I'm sitting up, I get lightheaded. If I sit there for too long.
They actually videoed him because I wasn't there. They videoed him like the first time he used it to like get to the chair, and I remember like crying and showing it to all my friends and my family, and everybody was like, "Oh my god!" And I'm like that's sad. Like that's like the progress that we were like.
But it was
happy
progress.
Over. Yeah, but it was just.
Yeah.
You don't realize how much people deteriorate and how quickly until you realize what their limitations are.
Yeah, it's time to go home, or try to go home. So I'm discharged. I'm able to go home. Victoria and my dad came to pick me up.
His dad has a Ford Escape.
Yeah, so it's like an SUV, and they bring me downstairs. Victoria wheels me outside, and I can't get from the wheelchair into my dad's car with the sliding board, anything. I can't get into the car, which we didn't think about, and the hospital didn't think about either. Physical therapy, nobody thought about how am I going to get into my dad's car, which is an SUV. You also have an SUV.
Yeah, like everybody
has an SUV except me, but they didn't bring my car. So I'm stuck in the wheelchair sitting outside the building, and it's so hot outside. It's like 100 degrees outside.
Because it's July.
It's July, and I'm getting lightheaded again.
And he's like looking at me.
Yeah.
And I could tell he's like not seeing me.
Because my vision is starting to go.
Because he's kind of like.
I can see people, but it's like black, and I could see yellow outlines of people, and my hearing is getting all muffled. I can barely hear people, and my vision's going, and the only way that I would not pass out, the only way that my vision would come back and my hearing would come back, is if I went like this.
Yeah, which is common because you need the blood flow.
Yeah, in the wheelchair. If I looked down at the ground and just stayed looking at the ground, leaning forward, it was the only way my vision would stay, and my hearing would kind of.
So the problem though is that like what happened with this is that like he couldn't get right like into the vehicle. So like nobody would lift him because it's a liability. He couldn't stand up. Like it was a really big issue. And so we're there and we're like, well, what do we do? So his dad like drives. He's like driving around the block, and we go back inside. And we're in like the waiting area, and this woman, I mean, she was like such an angel. She was so upset. She was like in charge of like the discharges. So like they wouldn't let people leave unless like they had like their ride there. Like you couldn't just like walk out as a discharge onto the street and like say, oh, I'll figure out how to get home. They were like, no, you need a ride. We need to verify the ride. Like it was very like official. So this woman was like very worried about him, and so now they called his nurse down from the floor that he was on. Her name was Anna, and she was the last nurse that he had, and she was such a sweetheart. Like I really feel bad because she really like cared, you know. I mean they all do, but like she really was just an extra special type of nurse. And so she came down and like she was like, and she's looking at him and she's like, what's going on? And so we're telling her, and she's like, so then she's like reviewing paperwork, and really what happened was like physical therapy kind of messed up, and they wrote him as able to do stuff, but knowing that he gets lightheaded, but they didn't write it correctly because he shouldn't have been discharged when he was. Like we all kind of were just like, yeah, he gets to go home, but like the reality is he was not in a position to go home, and so that was their fault. So they brought him back up to his room.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to leave, and then they called me, and they're like, well, we can send him home in like an Uber, and we'll pay for it. And I was like, I told them that you guys messed up, and clearly you told him he could go home when clearly he cannot go home. So I shouldn't have to pay, he shouldn't have to pay, our insurance shouldn't have to pay for anything. you should be covering him going home. And so they ended up getting an ambulette on a stretcher, and they stretchered his ass home. And he didn't get to leave the hospital until like 11.
Yeah, it was like 11 o'clock at night.
And he didn't get home till like 1 a.m. And at that point, we had like a hospital bed set up. Like, we moved everything downstairs because he couldn't use the stairs. So we had a hospital bed downstairs in the den.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we just transformed our den into like Dan's hospital room.
My bedroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's basically where I slept and spent all my time.
Because he couldn't go anywhere.
Because I couldn't move. Yeah, so I just moved downstairs into the hospital bed.
And we had like, we got a wheelchair and the transfer board and a commode and like all those things, like.
Yep.
And it was just, and then like at home services comes, right? So like visiting nurse services of New York is like what Sloan uses for their outpatient physical therapy and occupational therapy. So they came and evaluated him. He got PT. Karen, yep. She was awesome.
Yeah. And starting to move my foot.
Because he had a drop foot at first. It was like just.
Yep. And just so physical therapy's coming to the house. They try to get me to sit up in bed. Anytime I sit up in bed, I start to get lightheaded at first. But that starts to slowly go away. The more I sit up, the more I'm able to sit up longer and without having to lay back down. Yeah, and this is also around the time where my hair's falling out. This wasn't a choice.
And this wasn't a thing. That was the one thing I couldn't do.
So
I couldn't handle the hair.
My hair is falling out by the chunk. It started with just like hairs coming out, and then my hair started to feel like matted, like, and where I would go like this.
And he hadn't showered. He hadn't showered. I was sponge bathing him like in
I couldn't
get
in the shower.
Because he couldn't sit up.
Yeah.
So it's like.
So like my hair got to a point where I would go like this, and there's just a big chunk of hair in my hand.
And
so
it also got to a point where it was like matted so bad that it was like fallen out hair entangled with hair that was still on his head, like just sitting.
So it was getting so uncomfortable and gross that I finally you couldn't wash my hair. I had to have your mom do it because like
my mom did it.
She did it no problem.
And well, it bothered her, but like she did it because that was the one thing I couldn't do for you. I could do everything else for him. Nothing grossed me out, nothing made me upset, but like his hair made me upset, and I like couldn't do it.
And it was falling out so much that I finally just told you, just shave it off. Yeah. Because if it's going already, I'd rather just be in control of it and just I'll take it out.
Yeah.
So shaved my head.
I shaved his head.
Yeah. And
it was actually kind of fun. I'd never used a razor like a buzz cutter before.
It's the shortest I've ever had my hair.
He was basically bald anyway.
Yeah. And shaved head, and it's starting to grow back now.
Well, actually, it started to grow back before his last round of chemo, and then some of it came out again after his last round of chemo.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it's pretty much coming in.
Beard hair fell out too.
Yeah.
This is starting to come back. There's some spots. It's not growing great, but that's coming back.
His eyelashes, his eyebrows.
Yeah, all that
pretty
hair.
Pretty much all the hair on your body goes.
Armpit hair, leg hair.
All your hair goes.
Yeah, so.
They say that like some people it doesn't go. It goes. Every single person loses their hair.
I was like, shave it off, and now it's starting to come back, and it's slowly getting there.
Yep.